The news is really crazy right now, and it's never been harder to figure out who or what to believe. So we are developing a new podcast where we're going to dig into some of the tough trending topics as well as some of the data and see if we can't do a little bit better job of helping everyday people navigate the craziness and to figure out what's really going on. Today we're going to focus on a big question. Should we be panicking about what kids are eating, in particular the ultra-processed food that they're eating? I know when I hear about the statistics around ultra-processed food, I think, oh my gosh, we're all living on Twinkies and white bread, chips and ice cream. And maybe that's not actually the whole story. I'm Sharon Kardia. I'm a faculty member in the School of Public Health at the University of Michigan, and we're super lucky to have an expert here that can help us answer that question, or at least go into it a little bit, Kendrin Sonneville, who's a faculty member in our great Nutrition Sciences department. So welcome, Kendrin.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
To get us started, if you wouldn't mind just saying a little bit about your background, because people love to know kind of more about our faculty and what they do and where they came from.
Yeah, how on earth do people make it to public health? So I am a registered dietitian by training. So I started my career working with patients, working with families. I was at Boston Children's Hospital in the role of dietitian, and I spent most of my time working in the adolescent clinic, working with young people with eating disorders. So that was my primary clinical focus. But I worked at a few primary care clinics, so I saw kids and families that were coming in with just a range of health questions and concerns. And it sort of spans the gamut of people who had sort of poor nutrition and dietary intakes that were maybe negatively affecting their health. And then zooming over to my eating disorder clinic, where there were folks who really were suffering because they were too worried, right? Really focused on food and nutrition in a way that had become counterproductive.
Like hypervigilant.
Totally. And that, all my research questions, or my best research questions, come from my clinical time. And what I wondered is there like a sweet spot? I don't want to ignore nutrition. I'm a dietitian, so certainly I can't do that. And I also don't want to use messaging that is extreme or could be taken to an extreme. And that sort of curiosity of how can we talk about nutrition in a way that helps but doesn't harm, and what are messages that can work for most people, that's what actually got me interested in public health. And so I pursued my doctoral degree in public health, and short story long, here I am doing this work here at the Great School of Public Health.
We're super lucky to have you. I know that one of the things that young people these days, they have a lot of pressure from social media. They've got a lot of pressure from their parents. So being able to talk a little bit about this so parents and others can actually sort of figure out what's really going on. Mm-hmm. So one of the statistics that I recently heard and saw on my news feed was that like 70% of what kids are eating is ultra-processed.
Yep.
And then, talking to you, you were like, oh yeah, there was this August 2025 report that the CDC put out.
Yep.
And it's got like a stunning title, ultra-processed food consumption in youth and adults.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Riveting. Everyone has probably accessed that,
That's right? From the National Center of Health Statistics. But, when I went and looked at it, I thought, well, this is a pretty important study, right? So can you tell us a little bit about that study?
Sure.
And we'll talk about the statistics sort of coming up, but I think it's a good story about how they get the data.
Yeah, it's a great study, and it helps us understand what's happening across our country in terms of nutrition. So this study from August uses data from a survey that we call NHANES, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. This survey has been around since the 1970s, and it's how we really know how our population eats. The survey's done, there's been big chunks of time between survey waves. Sometimes they do it every 2 years, but it gives us sort of a snapshot over time at what are people eating, what are their health concerns, and then it allows us to understand what should be worrying about, right? In terms of the field of public health and nutrition, what are sort of big patterns that we can address?
Yep.
And so it's nationally representative. It's not just a specific area. It takes people from across the country, so it allows us to really think kind of at a big scale. So this particular study uses nutrition data that they collect from kids and families that uses something called a 24-hour recall, where you ask someone, what did you eat yesterday?
And have to remember everything.
And you have to remember, and we assume people are telling the truth, and there's, we do it twice.
Is there any bias in that?
So there is great research to show that people are pretty good. There are certain foods that tend to be missed, and certain foods that people tend to embellish on. But there are ways that people who know a lot about statistics can correct for that. So we know it's not perfect, but if we're using the same questions over time, if there's major shifts in patterns, we know that people have been not more or less honest probably over time, that the shifts are probably true shifts. And so this great study looked at what folks were eating at the last wave of this survey, and they categorized all the foods into their level of processing. And so this report was interested in looking at foods that are called ultra-processed foods, and told us what percentage of the diet of Americans, both kids and adults are included in this report, what percentage of what we eat comes from ultra-processed foods.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you.
Yeah, lots to unpack here.
Now
right?
I'm going to ask you, why are people worried about ultra-processed foods?
So a big part of why we're worried about it is health, right? In studies where we look at ultra-processed food consumption, we know that people who eat more ultra-processed foods have lower diet quality, right? So less nutrition.
Less nutrition.
And
so that's like vitamins and minerals.
Vitamins,
and protein,
minerals,
whatever.
fiber. Yes,
okay.
right. So in general, ultra-processed food intake is related to the overall nutrition that we eat. And intake of ultra-processed foods also is linked with some health outcomes. So more risk of diabetes, more risk of heart disease, more risk of depression.
Hypertension.
All the things.
Okay.
So that's sort of
things that'll kill you.
Things that will kill you sooner rather than later, right? But then there's the other reason of why we even wanted to understand what foods are, what processing looks like. And it's because our food environment has changed like in a profound way in the last 75, 100 years. And we need to figure out how to measure that, right? And nutrients doesn't tell us everything, right? Just because we know protein intake has changed, we don't know why. And so this idea of understanding processing in food is a way to really better understand what on earth has happened to our food environment. We're eating out more, there's more influence of the food industry, there's more advertising, there's more convenience in snack foods for reasons that are like kind of understandable. And one way to be able to measure what is happening with our food environment is to use a metric or use a term like ultra processing, and that helps us to understand those changes.
Okay. So then I got to ask, what is an ultra-processed food?
Sure.
And we might do a lightning round, and I might put my favorite grocery list and figure out what I'm eating.
Sure. If you want to show me your refrigerator, I'd be happy to put some X's over it. This is probably the hardest question that's going to come up today. It's really hard to define processing. And there are lots of researchers who work really hard trying to figure out what is the best way to define how processed a food is. And what makes it hard is that a lot of foods are processed for reasons that sort of run the gamut. We're not always processing foods to make them really tasty and delicious and to make us sort of crave them. And certainly the food industry is doing that, but that's not the only reason they process foods.
So like some is safety?
Yes. Food safety.
Like raw milk may not be the best thing.
Yeah, we would prefer to have our milk processed to some extent. Nutrient fortification, right? If you look at many grain products, you see there's iron in there and there's zinc in there, and that's because when we're making bread, there are nutrients that we lose in the process of making grain foods, and we add those back in to make sure that people are not deficient in vitamins and minerals. So that's processing, and that's processing that's really supportive of health. And so it's tricky to sort of draw the line of what is too much processing or what's the right or the wrong kind of processing. But there is a researcher in Brazil who developed a classification system that has 4 levels, and the highest one is ultra-processed foods, and that includes foods that include industrial ingredients. And that is in contrast to what is the lowest level, minimally processed foods you can recognize, fruits, vegetables, things you can buy at a grocery store. You know what the plant was, you know what the animal was. And
like apples and bananas and broccoli. Those are the raw, unprocessed. Okay.
Precisely.
So this classification system, 4 levels, and Which one is I'll call it good foods that are sort of is that one? Is that 4?
So one.
That's
One
what?
is minimally processed or unprocessed food. 4 is ultra processed. And again, it's just moving. When you go from 1 to 4, you're going further away from foods you can recognize.
And more
moving
towards the
from
one that's got the
foods-
list of chemicals on it?
Precisely. Foods to ingredients to food ingredients that are unrecognizable. And that's sort of the kind of the spectrum that we're working with. And they create criteria to figure out which one falls in exactly which category, which is probably not that useful on a day-to-day basis. But it's a reminder that food exists on a continuum, and there's some things that involve a whole lot of processing before we are able to eat them.
Where's a Twinkie?
4.
Okay.
Easy 4.
Where's yogurt?
What kind of yogurt?
Oh, geez. I used to feed my son Go-Gurt.
Yeah, so Go-Gurt would probably be a 4. I don't want to start
That is mind-blowing.
endorsing brands.
Right.
But if we're adding sugar, if there's artificial colors, if there's emulsifiers, again, some of these things are really useful in the food supply,
Yeah.
improving shelf life, texture. There's lots of reasons. And yet we have to draw a line in the sand, and a lot of those things that are really supportive of health and are foods that kids like, and a way that they get their protein and their vitamin D and calcium in the yogurt example, those still end up in that top category.
Okay, cheese.
Cheese is a 3, squarely a 3.
Cheese is a 3.
Yeah.
Okay, because the string cheeses and those kind of things were a go-to.
Yeah. Yep.
Lunches, snacks, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll come back with other lists.
Yeah,
but,
great.
So we figured out what ultra-processed is, why people are worrying about it. So maybe let's take a look at some of this data that was in this August CDC report. And we've got it here. It's a nice bar graph, relatively sort of straightforward. And I see the data has been split into age buckets, 1 to 5, 6 to 11, 12 to 18. In the sort of younger, the youth, and then in the adults, 19 to 39, 40 to 59, and then 60 and older. And it looks like the adults are pretty steady. 51.7 in the older to 54.4 in the younger, so in the 50-ish. And the kids are indeed higher.
Sure.
Right? Now, it wasn't the 70% that I heard.
Precisely
so
that.
Somebody took a little liberty
Lots
there.
of rounding up happening in these headlines, right?
That's exactly right. So the percent of calories. So when you look at this, is this something that you think, the United States really needs to shift these? How do you think about this graph? Like, what's it meaning to you as a dietitian, thinking about the kids in the United States?
Yeah, so I think the headline, like the number is off a bit. But this graph does tell me that ultra-processed foods dominate our food supply, and particularly for kids, that the majority of the foods that they are having are from ultra-processed foods. And that it's lower than it is for adults, and that it's school-age kids through adolescence that seem to be eating the most ultra-processed foods. This younger age group, this age 1 through 5, have slightly lower intake, about 50 here, 56.1% of their intake is coming from ultra-processed foods. So kids are eating a lot of ultra-processed foods.
I feel like I'm going to do a lot of non sequiturs. Is formula an ultra-processed food?
Formula is an ultra-processed food.
Good grief.
Yeah.
Okay. So even the 1-year-olds that are taking a bottle to bed.
That counts.
That counts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this feels like the thing I love to unpack when I talk about ultra-processed food is, it dominates our food supply, and yet there's a lot of really high-value foods within the category of ultra-processed foods. So maybe we don't need quite as much shock and alarm. There's plenty of room for improvements in the American diet for sure, and the food supply, and the role of food industry in what gets in front of kids and what they are seeing in terms of advertisement. So a lot of work to do. And yet it's probably not as grim as the sort of figure would suggest.
Is there any place where you could actually look up foods and whether or not they are considered ultra-processed? And because I'm thinking about some of the, nothing wrong with being a nerdy parent around your kids' health.
Yes.
Sort of like that they want to, be able to see.
Yeah.
And think, I think this is going to be okay.
Yeah. It's a great question, and there are places to look up how do certain research group classify this food. I don't suggest parents do this. This feels, unless they're really interested in it, because you're pulling academic papers and trying to
That's a little bit
decide.
much,
It
yeah.
seems like a bit extra for the task at hand. Parents can apply the classification system. Like, can I recognize where this food came from? Are most of these
Like look at the ingredients.
Look at the ingredients list, look at the physical food, like what probably constituted this food. They can understand.
If they can know where
Right.
the food came
Yeah.
from, it might be okay.
It might be okay. And I mean, researchers need to make these categories, but the categories from a parent's perspective feel not that important, right? Because sometimes we're sort of in the edges of this yogurt versus that yogurt, and that is not affecting your kid's health almost at all, right? It's sort of these big picture patterns, not these sort of individual foods. And there's, back to our original kind of question of how do we communicate nutrition in a way that isn't too extreme, doesn't make people so obsessed that they sort of lose the big picture, and so
or give up.
Like
I can't feed my kid anything.
So why bother, right?
That's right. Okay, we'll go back to the Twinkie.
Yes, go back to the Twinkie, and thinking about that category 1, which is pretty straightforward, right? The processing foods of where does something land is hard to do and probably not worth the effort. But you can see how much of the foods I'm eating, my family is eating. How much of those foods are whole or are minimally processed, and that feels like a much easier focus and message is to think about what to add more of rather than what can I swap here, there, and making these sort of small changes around the edges that are not really impacting health and are causing a lot of stress.
So then I'm going to ask you an impossible question that you can sort of say, forget it.
Yeah.
But it's like if I am figuring out how much my kid is eating in that category 1, which are the natural foods that I recognize, the whole foods and things like that, what's the balance? So if it's, 60% right now, am I looking to try to move it to 40?
Mm-hmm.
Am I trying to look at, where should I be, kind of conceptualizing what I'm trying to get my kids to eat?
So I love that question because there's no current recommendation of what % of your diet should come from ultra-processed food. This concept is new enough that we don't have nutrition guidelines for ultra-processed foods in the same way that we have for nutrients, right? We know how many milligrams of calcium you're supposed to have every day or grams of protein. We've done that work. Science has an incentive or has sort of been able to get a consensus there. So for ultra-processed foods, we don't have a certain percentage. And when we think about what we're telling families, like if we're thinking about a public health conversation or a clinical conversation, folks have to start with where they are, right? Context matters. What is realistic for a family matters. So if a family's at 80%, to come up with a recommendation that is like less than 50% feels so out of reach and we're losing people, right? It's about making small changes that are sustainable for your family because changing one's diet is really hard, right? It takes time and money and planning, which is also time and also money. And so we have to really meet people where they are and start with small changes.
Okay. Maybe a bag of grapes rather than a Go-Gurt.
Sure.
Okay. Can we go to the next slide? Because this one, this one was really sort of like ripped the Band-Aid off for me around this because, so this is the top caloric contributors to ultra-processed foods consumed by youth and adults. And you'll see that in both youth and adults, the #1 caloric contributor are sandwiches.
Oof.
And I was like, sandwiches?
Sandwiches.
How many people eat sandwiches and why is it on the bad list?
So Twinkies wasn't #1, to go back to your original question. And the question, how many people eat sandwiches? A lot of people eat sandwiches.
Yes.
So a reminder that staple foods that also happen to provide a lot of nutrition can be ultra-processed. So ultra-processed ingredients like store-bought bread, that's going to be ultra-processed.
So even if I've got store-bought whole wheat
bread that doesn't
lettuce,
distinguish.
Tomato, some kind of slice of turkey, maybe some mayo or mustard or something like that, that's ultra-processed.
Yeah. Okay. And it's because often it comes from the bread, but there are ways in which cheese and meat can also land itself in that top category. But it's a reminder that processing is not nutrition. They are related. In a lot of foods, high processing means not so great nutrition, but they're
not the same.
They're not the same. And so this is one of the reasons why I have less panic maybe than other people when I see those headlines, is because I know what all ultra-processed food includes. And it's sandwiches, which we're not trying to take out of the diets of kids. Literally, what on earth would you put in a packed lunch?
Yep.
I mean, other things, but not too many other options.
Yep.
And what you mentioned before, the infant formula, and we can go back to the yogurts, how on earth there's so many foods that we would be encouraging parents to be feeding their kids because they provide so much nutrition that do in fact fall in the ultra-processed food.
Okay, I'm finally getting it. It's finally reaching that nutrition and processing are not the same
Not
thing.
the same, yep.
Okay. So these are very different buckets.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I do think most of us would recognize that the sweet bakery products are probably in the let's be, judicious with that rather than, thinking, but even things like the savory snacks, I mean, that seems like, hummus or things like that is in that category. Most of us think, oh, that's a relatively healthy snack.
Yeah, I also think about like cheese and crackers or sort of kind of peanut butter type, I keep going to like crackery type things, but a lot of
So crackers are on the list.
Yeah, crackers are certainly on the list. And these are the kinds of things we are giving to kids, some sort of grain product with some sort of protein, because that usually keeps them full. Yep. We have to find foods that are non-perishable if you're throwing them in a snack bag or a lunch bag. And so when you are having to be mindful of stability, if you don't want things to spoil, it's more likely that the version you use is going to be ultra-processed.
Okay. So I look at this and I think, boy, this is an analysis issue. Could there be a different kind of analysis? So maybe, if I'm getting this right, you could have a nutrition by processing kind of line, so that it'd be easier to see, all right, where is the nutrition low and the processing high? That's where I need to figure out how I might shift things, and leave the good high nutrition and the ultra processed probably that might be okay for what we're doing.
I can reassure you that work is underway here at University of Michigan. So we have an expert in food addiction specifically, but Ashley Gearhart, who does work in ultra-processed foods. She's based in psychology, and she and I collaborate on a lot of projects, and one of them is precisely what you talk about, is what can we enter into the equation related to nutrition? What nutrition metrics can we add in to make this classification even more useful? So work is in process, so more in part 2 of this podcast, I think. But I also want to sort of go back to that question, which is such an interesting, important scientific question, and how that relates to what we tell families, and how important it is for families to know, again, what is that sort of perfect combination. And I tend to really push back on the need to have these perfect categories because we're working in patterns. And also when we have really specific definitions that we promote, it really leaves the food industry in this position to capitalize on that they can say, we can make a food where we dial this up and dial this down and meet this standard so we can label our food in this way, maximize our profits. And that isn't really the spirit of what we're trying to change here. We're trying to change the food supply, moving things to more minimally processed foods, and creating these perfect cutoffs tend to not translate to better foods. It tends to translate into profits for the food industry.
I was going to say I'll call it reactivity to that guideline so that they're able to sort of be on the right side. Okay.
Yeah, it makes me think about recently Lunchables.
Yeah.
That's a 4 for sure, in case there was any doubt. So
I even ate those.
Yes. So the Lunchables that are sold in the grocery store don't meet the guidelines for the National Lunch Program, right? Because there are requirements related to nutrients. But food companies can make special formulations for the school lunch program. And so there is a Lunchable that is available in schools, and Lunchables that are available at the grocery store. And it's this perfect example of the food industry having the ability to make products better and not being incentivized to do this for public health, but are incentivized to do this to be able to get into schools, to get access to kids, to have their brand in the face of kids, to have partnerships with schools so they can make their products more nutritious with that in mind, but are not motivated by sort of general public health to do so. So there's this.
Yep.
Yes, enough said.
Yes, definitely capitalism is alive and well as a guiding sort of force and principle in
Precisely.
our food supply.
Yep.
Okay. So I have to sort of then ask,
Mhm.
looking at this, is this getting worse or getting better?
Great question.
And I think that's the next slide.
I think that's the next slide. So the long answer to your question is, what is the time horizon? So if we went back 50 more years, it's definitely getting worse, right? Our food supply, in terms of how much processed food is available in our food supply and how much we're
Process
eating.
is processed.
Yes, it has been processing. So that change has happened. But in recent years, things seem to be moving in a good direction. So the brief that we've been talking about, this paper from August, compares the last 10 years, or the last 2013 to 2023, which was the last NHANES they have, and what happened in terms of ultra-processed food intake among kids. We'll sort of focus on that top line. And from that 2017 time point to this most recent one, there has been a decrease, and that decrease actually is statistically significant. It might sort of look pretty small, but it is
big enough that it matters.
It's big enough that it matters. And so it is still high, right? We remain above 60% in terms of calories from ultra-processed food, but it does seem to be decreasing.
And one of the things about that, just for sort of people to understand, is that when you're talking about large populations, small differences still means millions of people,
right,
or in this case, millions of calories.
Yep.
Right? And that translates into differences in health outcomes in terms of how many people are affected. So I totally get that it doesn't look that much, but I will say that it's good that it's going down.
It's good that it's going down.
And so then my next question probably is a little bit more charged, that has to do with, there's been so much in the news about food and the MAHA kind of approach. So when you really sort of think about this, are you seeing that there are exaggerated attentions to this happening right now in order to push a kind of, I'll call it category 1 raw food agenda? And we won't talk about beef tallow, but that one worried me as soon as I saw it, because my background is in cardiovascular disease research, and those kinds of things have been long shown to really clog the arteries. So it was like, I don't really know if that's a good direction to go. What do you think the direction right now of the country in this area, and specifically the CDC?
Yeah. A lot of answers to that question come to mind. The first is, I do feel encouraged by the fact that people are really talking about nutrition. People are talking about
That's true. It's more.
The food that we provide kids, right? And the food we provide kids has room for improvement. And so I think that's a real opportunity in public health right now, is to think about areas where there is a lot of consensus of where we need to make some movements. And again, the quality of kids' diets is a great place to start. I think the focus on vilifying specific foods and food additives and sort of where that policy is headed feels misguided, because what I am seeing is a lot of messaging that is vilifying specific foods and parents for picking those foods and schools for serving those foods, without recognizing that parents are trying really hard. They are
stressed,
doing the best they can in a food environment that is setting them up to fail. And we talked about this already, but to make dietary changes, you need time and money. And if we are cutting funding for SNAP benefits, and we are cutting school lunch program,
and other food programs and things.
If we are cutting food programs, then this obsession with specific foods or food additives feels so disingenuous that we are actually not committed to serving families and supporting families and helping families.
Real everyday needs.
Real everyday needs. I think about, because I worked as a dietitian, that I would recommend that a family try a particular food, and like the risk that they take when they try something new is, my kid could hate it, It could spoil because I maybe don't know how to make it. Like I have to be able to absorb that risk in terms of my time and budget. And like, of course you are going to go to your go-to, the thing you know your kid likes, the thing you know how to make. Like, why would you deviate from that when time is limited and money is limited? And so if we really want to support families in making changes, food has to be more available. Food has to be cheaper. And I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of changing the food supply. And, you know, I always talk about the food industry because of my background in eating disorders. I can't help but think about the industries that profit when we have an unhealthy relationship with food in our bodies. So many industries capitalize on our insecurities and our relationship with food in our bodies. And the food industry is one of them. And the food industry has very little incentive, like we talked about, to make food better.
Yep.
And in fact, we have no restriction on advertising of food to kids in this country. We have none. Other countries have been able to figure out ways to limit advertising of food. In this country, we do not, and it is a part of our ironclad First Amendment. But what that means is not only are we not putting guardrails on the food industry, we actually incentivize them because advertising expenses are an ordinary business expense. So we are giving them a tax break for advertising to kids. And so instead of blaming families for picking convenience food and sort of the messaging that is really dominating this discourse in this sort of moment of food dyes and sort of hysteria about ultra-processed foods, we are not actually pointing the finger at the industry who is to blame here. And I think that is what's frustrating. In this moment of opportunity, I think that's what's frustrating, is that these sort of grander forces are being left out of the conversation.
If there was something that, you know, a food, you know, company could do that you would think, hey, small thing on their part, maybe it doesn't maximize profits, but it would still, you know, be a good thing both for them and for, you know, kids, parents. Is there anything you could suggest? I mean, is it taking out the chemicals? Is it, where would you like point to and say, maybe start here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because there's so many things I would like the food industry to do differently. But I think at the end of the day, advertising feels like the one that seems more important than anything, because they are using practices of manipulation to develop brand loyalty early. And young kids don't have the ability to distinguish between advertising content and other
like
content.
The social media,
yes.
AI sort of manipulating
Totally.
the whole mindset of the young children and adolescents, so that they are, you know, basically being turned towards things.
Right. And so they're using these tools of manipulation. They're advertising. They're also using tools of manipulation in their formulation. Foods that are delicious, foods that we want to take extra bites of, foods that are advertised with a character. Like, there's so many practices that they are doing. And it's really hard, again, to make a nutrition requirement for a food company, because they can dial up nutrients very easily, right? They can add a little bit more protein. If you've been in the grocery store, you know that they can add protein to everything. Literally everything. Water has protein now. And so it can't be about nutrition, because the food industry can work with that, right? They can manipulate those types of guidelines. And so I think about advertising as a leverage point that feels really like it would have a lot of impact on kids and kids' health, and some sort of voluntary agreement to not actually directly target young kids in advertising would be probably my top choice.
The more you talk, the more I'm thinking about some of the guardrails on like tobacco products and alcohol and those kinds of things. So, okay, I get it. I get it. What should parents be focusing on if they could do one thing, right?
Yeah.
Is it swapping out one of those category 1 whole foods for, I mean, is there some simple thing that they could do you could recommend?
Yeah, I think the focusing on what to have more of versus what to have less of tends to be my preference, what I always use clinically, because it's more concrete. To say, don't do all these things, families are still left with like, well, what do I do? Yep. And there, you know, the negative framing comes with risks.
Yep.
It makes people tense, afraid of food. Again, it can lead to this sort of all or nothing thinking. And if you tell a kid you are never allowed to have this food, a kid will eat that food as much as possible when they are not around you. And like, there's research to show that this happens, that,
I bet. Can't have those cookies.
Yeah, but when you go to a birthday party, you will eat that all the time because kids feel that. They feel that restriction and they crave autonomy and control. And so trying to use more sort of gentle messaging of this is, the food that we mostly have. These are foods that we also have in our house, and not trying to create this hierarchy of this is the good stuff and this is the bad stuff. There's a place for all of it. So I'd like to think about not over-focusing on the ultra-processed foods as foods to avoid, but really think about what are the foods that really should be the backbone of our diet because they are packed with nutrition and because whole foods tend to be the most filling because whole foods have the fiber that sort of sticks with us longer and so tend to serve us better in terms of energy. And so focusing in on what foods within this category appeals to you. Like what do you feel like you could fit into your meal planning? What foods are available? What foods match your family's preferences? Your sort of cultural foods, like thinking about what works for your family and really focus on more of that to shift the overall balance of the diet, not just focusing on specific foods to limit.
So I keep wanting to ask you, like, can you give me examples? Can you give me examples? But I know that everybody's cultural background, everybody's family background means that, some people are going to move towards the pastas and the other people are going to move towards the meat and the potatoes or whatever it is based on the background. So are there sort of recommendations that you could give to parents of like books that they could read or other podcasts or things that would allow them to get a little bit more into sort of, I'll call it how it might sort of match their own family's needs?
So it's a great question is, what books I like is going to differ from what other families like because everyone has.
Well, you're a dietitian.
I'm a dietitian. Terrible, right? Like she should be. Yes. But I'll say this. I'm a dietitian. I've been a dietitian for, I was going to say 100 years, but it hasn't been quite that long, for 20 years. And I am still seeking out content related to nutrition because there's always more to learn. It's not the nutrition science, it's the application of it and how to make this work. I am a parent of a 6-year-old, and so I thought I knew a lot about nutrition until I became a parent. And then you have to think about how do you take these guidelines and make it work in your family and make it work with your special child who has all sorts of ideas and preferences and feedback on how you feed them.
To be challenging around food.
Yeah, and so I do have my preferred sort of resources in terms of like the books I read and the books I recommend. And again, this is heavily influenced by my own background, but I really like books that focus on sort of the balance between nutrition messaging and raising a kid that has a healthy relationship with food and how to like strike a balance between actually caring about what your kid eats because it's important, but not spending so much time thinking about it that you disrupt their enjoyment, right? Their pleasure with food, their curiosity with food. So I think that we'll be able to, to link this stuff, but there's a book called How to Raise an Intuitive Eater, recognizing that people have some natural intuition, like related to what feels good, what tastes good, when am I full, when am I hungry, and really teaching parents how to honor that. Fat Talk, Parenting in an Age of Diet Culture by Virginia Sole-Smith. I'm quoted in the book, so this is just to put that out there. It's not why I'm recommending it.
She don't get any royalties.
Yes, right. She is a brilliant journalist who started her career working in women's magazine and realize like, what on earth am I doing, right? We are pitching self-acceptance on one page and selling a diet on the next page. And she does a really good job sort of recognizing that these forces are hard to make sense of. Like, what is good nutrition? What is too much? How much do I need to, or what do I need to do to tune out these messages of diet culture and weight? And so it's a really beautiful book for parents who are wanting to make sure that the relationship with food is really preserved. And then the book, Fearless Eating, How to Raise Healthy Eaters from High Chair to High School. This is another book that allows you to think about your developmental stage with your kid, right? The way that I talk about what foods we eat in our house and why I might serve something with my 6-year-old is different from what I did when he was 3. And who knows what I'll do when he's 16. This feels terrifying and far away, but there'll be different ways that we need to talk about food and different ways that you fuel kids when they are older. And so those are 3 book recommendations. And I tend to be thrilled with nuance, right? I don't want to read a book that says, feed this, 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 and this, because it is never going to be right for the reader, right? Because there's so many reasons why people eat the foods that they eat. And so I love books and sort of social media accounts that teach you to think about what to do with a recommendation, not to read it as a hard and fast rule, but how to sort of make sense of it and then adapt that advice for your life.
Okay, that's great. That's great advice. All righty. Last one, because we're in a school of public health.
Sure.
What can public health officials do? Right? So how can they help people? Because it's not just the CDC. We've got people in departments of health across the country.
Yep.
This is pretty complicated territory. The food programs are being, in a sense, defunded,
Yep.
and it's becoming more and more difficult. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to navigate this within their jobs in departments of health?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of advice of what to do. Harder to know sometimes how to do it in a moment where funding is really limited, but focusing on food programs at schools and communities.
Okay.
Like how
Bare bones.
Bare
right,
bones.
baseline.
Make it, again, easy to eat in the way that we're asking families to eat, and think about food costs and ways to be able to make foods more affordable. I think also about, just again, recognizing caregiver burden. I'm a mother, so I think a lot about how much responsibility for feeding kids often lands on moms, and how we can support mothers and other parents who are responsible for feeding their family of what they need to be able to make all of this work more possible. And it's about support, it's about resources, it's about sort of building up the people who make the food decisions and, like I said, are doing the best they can with what they have.
All right. Okay. That's fabulous. Maybe one last question,
Sure.
sort of ask about, given what you've seen,
Sure.
where you are, like what makes you hopeful or optimistic about, today's world of food?
Yeah. I guess I'll say, I'm supposed to pick one thing, but maybe I'm going to pick two. One we've already touched on. I think that this moment and the it's kind of universal interest, like the fact that this is something we can all get on board with, and that we all have to eat. We all want to eat foods that support our health. We definitely want to eat or provide foods that support the health of our kids. And so the fact that we can agree on this thing feels really exciting. And it's not that we're not without sort of kind of sticky areas within this conversation, but people are really thinking about this topic now, and that gives me hope. I also feel really hopeful about our students here, and I know that is going to sound corny. This wasn't even a bullet point on my prepared notes, but
we got great students.
Yeah.
But please keep going.
As the students in our nutrition department are coming in with just really big ideas and sort of recognizing the problem for what it is, and not thinking they're going to come in and shake their finger and say, eat this and it'll change the world. They recognize, because they are nutrition students in a school of public health, that there's nutrition science that we should know and understand, but we have to think about kind of the broader society and how it supports how we eat. And so I just feel really hopeful about the sort of next generation of trainees that are really trying to think about this sort of complex question. I know that feels like a canned response, but like these students come in and I feel really excited to see what they are going to do and how they're going to take this knowledge and try to solve this issue even more than we've been able to solve it to date.
I think that is a great point to make. I also agree. I think that this incoming generation of public health students is fantastic. We often worry about them because of the way in which things look like they're falling apart, but they seem that they are engaged and they are up for the challenge. So we're very lucky to have a great school and great students.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Kendrin. This has been fabulous. And I'll also end with is sort of next time that you run into some kind of sensational headline, you might just want to pull back the curtains and see what's underneath and really kind of make some of your own decisions around, like the ultra-processed food. What does that really mean for your own lives? And until next time, take care. Thanks.
Thanks.